Murder Among the Sandstone Shadows. Chapter 1. An Invitation from Mayfair. The rain had been falling all morning, thin misty sheets that painted the cobblestones of Mount Street a slick silvery grey. Inside number 32, a stately Georgian townhouse nestled among ivy-draped railings and polished brass, Detective Jane Parsons was ushered into a drawing-room that smelled faintly of orange blossoms and aged sherry. Lady Beatrice Wetherall stood at the window, her gloved hands clasped tightly in front of her, her figure statuesque in mourning black. She turned as Jane entered, her eyes an icy shade of blue, appraised the visitor with a mix of desperation and calculation. "Miss Parsons," she said, "thank you for coming on such short notice." Jane inclined her head. "You said the matter was urgent and delicate." "It is both," Lady Beatrice replied, motioning toward a tufted armchair. "Would you care for tea, or—" "No tea," Jane said gently. "Just the truth." A thin smile played on the widow's lips, and for a moment she looked almost amused. "You cut to the chase. Sebastian would have liked that. He despised small talk, though he excelled in it when required." Jane waited. "My husband," Lady Beatrice began slowly, "was found dead 3 weeks ago near Petra, collapsed beside the ancient ruins. Sunstroke, the official report claimed. A tragic accident in the middle of his latest expedition." "I heard the news," Jane replied. "The papers mentioned he was a noted archaeologist. His work with the British Museum—" "Was a cover," Lady Beatrice said, interrupting. "At least in part. Sebastian's true obsession was a tomb he believed lay beneath the cliffs of Petra. He had uncovered a fragment of a scroll written in Nabatean and Greek, hinting at a hidden chamber, and something else, something he never fully explained to me." Jane leaned forward. "And you believe his death was not an accident?" There was a long pause. "I believe Sebastian was silenced, and that his journal, his private field notes, have gone missing. I need someone discreet, intelligent, and brave enough to find them." "Why not go to the Foreign Office?" "Because I suspect they are involved, or at the very least wish to keep this matter buried. I've already been warned to let the past rest." Her voice trembled slightly. "That's why I called you." Jane reached into her handbag and withdrew a notebook. "Tell me everything you can about the journal and the people who were close to Lord Wetherall on the expedition." Lady Beatrice handed her a small list. 4 names were scrawled in fine ink. Miss Clara Digby, her personal companion, who had accompanied her husband's team under the pretence of assisting with cataloguing. Sir Archerald Mercer, a wealthy industrialist and silent backer of the journey. Professor Edwin Kettering, a rival archaeologist from Oxford who had arrived at Petra days before Sebastian's death. Franklin Wilde, a young American explorer, part of the dig team, known for his charm and erratic loyalties. Jane studied the list. "And what's your interest in retrieving the journal, beyond sentiment?" Lady Beatrice stood. "Because it doesn't just contain drawings and translations. Sebastian told me, before he left, that if anything happened to him, I must see that the journal never reached the wrong hands. He said it held implications, not just for archaeology, but for the crown." Outside, the rain continued to fall, but within Jane's mind something clicked into place. A murder masked as an accident, a missing journal, political stakes, and a foreign land steeped in ancient secrets. Jane rose from her seat, her voice calm and steady. "Then I shall retrieve it, Lady Beatrice. But I warn you, I don't stop until I uncover the truth, however inconvenient it might be." Lady Beatrice gave a tight nod. "That is exactly what I am counting on, Miss Parsons." And so, before the fire in the elegant drawing-room had a chance to fade, Jane Parsons stepped out into the damp streets of Mayfair, already piecing together the clues that would soon lead her far from London's marble halls and into the fiery heart of the desert. Chapter 2. The Journal That Vanished. The following morning brought a crisp breeze over London, sweeping across Hyde Park. Jane Parsons stood at the corner of Albemarle Street, adjusting the collar of her camel-coloured trench coat. Her destination loomed ahead, the esteemed offices of Sir Archerald Mercer, housed within a columned Georgian building that whispered of old money and discreet power. Mercer Industries, according to Lady Beatrice, had financed several expeditions across Egypt and the Ottoman Empire, always under the veil of archaeological interest, but rumoured to have other motivations, political ones. She entered the marble-floored lobby, where a liveried attendant bowed and directed her to the upper floor. Sir Archibald awaited her in a book-lined study. The man was in his late 60s, heavy-set, but with sharp, hawk-like eyes that had not dulled with age. His suit, a dark worsted wool with a faint pinstripe, was immaculately tailored, and he held a crystal tumbler of brandy, though it was not yet noon. "You're Beatrice's private sleuth, I presume," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I prefer investigator, Sir Archibald," Jane replied coolly, taking a seat without being offered one. "I have some questions about Lord Wetherell's last expedition. You were the chief sponsor." "I contributed to the cause, yes. I've always believed in preserving the great monuments of our world. If Britain does not, who shall?" "Quite noble," Jane said dryly, "but I wonder why an industrialist with holdings in copper and railways would care so deeply for ancient Nabatean tombs." His jaw twitched, but he smiled. "Curiosity is a virtue, Miss Parsons, but it can also be a liability. Beatrice should not have dragged you into this." "She didn't drag. I walked willingly." She reached into her satchel and retrieved a folded document, one of Sebastian Wetherell's last letters, given to her by Lady Beatrice. In this, Lord Wetherell mentions a breach of confidence. Would you happen to know what he meant? Sir Archibald took the letter, scanning it. For a moment, Jane saw something flicker behind his eyes, alarm, perhaps, or calculation. "He was prone to paranoia in the desert," Mercer said smoothly, handing it back. "The heat does that. Perhaps he imagined spies behind every dune." "Then it's fortunate he had such loyal sponsors," Jane murmured. "Do you know where his journal is?" Mercer blinked. "Journal?" "His private field notes. Lady Beatrice believes it may have been left behind, or stolen." "If it exists, the journal is likely buried in the sand, along with a dozen other useless relics. The Bedouins stripped his camp before the Ottoman guards arrived. Opportunistic vultures." But Jane wasn't convinced. She caught the way his fingers tightened around the tumbler, the deliberate pace of his words. He was hiding something. She rose. "Thank you for your time, Sir Archibald. If I find the journal, I'll be sure to forward any useful discoveries about Nabatean monuments to your office." He chuckled darkly. "Be careful in Petra, Miss Parsons. It's not just the cliffs that are unstable." Later. That day, Jane's next stop took her across town to the British Museum, where she sought out Professor Edwin Kettering, the Oxford archaeologist who had been working near Petra at the time of Wetherell's death. He greeted her amid a sea of pottery shards and cataloguing crates. Kettering was a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and spectacles that magnified his pale green eyes. Yes, I remember Wetherell," he said, barely looking up from his notes. "Had a flair for drama, that one. Always believed he was on the verge of some grand revelation. Nonsense, of course. Petra's been picked clean for years." "And yet you were there," Jane noted. "Arrived just days before his death, I'm told." "Coincidence. I was charting the southern tombs with a team from Istanbul. Academic venture." Jane narrowed her gaze. "And when you heard of his death?" He scratched at his brow. tragic, though hardly surprising. He insisted on exploring remote canyons without proper protection or supplies. Mad, really. "Did you see his camp before it was cleared?" Kettering hesitated. Briefly, disarray, nothing of value remained. A few crates, torn maps. His assistant had fled, can't recall the name. Young fellow, American perhaps. Jane perked up. Franklin Wilde? Yes, that's the one. Charming but unreliable. Swore up and down he'd hand over Wetherall's effects to the embassy, then vanished. A flicker of understanding passed through Jane's mind. So the journal hadn't been left behind. It had been taken by Franklin Wilde. That evening, back at her flat, Jane lit a lamp and poured herself a cup of Darjeeling. On her desk lay a map of the Petra region, annotated with red ink, names of dig sites, paths taken by Sebastian Wetherall's team, and the last reported location of Franklin Wilde. Next to it, a telegram sat unopened. She broke the seal. To Miss Jane Parsons, London. From C. Digby, Ritz Hotel, London. Lady B insists I accompany you to Petra. I have knowledge of the team and terrain. Happy to be of assistance. Kindly meet tomorrow morning. Clara! Jane's brows lifted. Lady Beatrice's companion, a woman she had never met, was to travel with her into the desert. The matter was growing stranger by the hour. She pulled out her notebook and scribbled, "Franklin Wilde holds the journal. Locate him. Sir Archibald knows more than he admits. Likely has political ties. Professor Kettering, deflection or honest disinterest? Miss Clara Digby, why is she so interested?" Jane sipped her tea. The game had begun, and the sands of Petra waited. Chapter 3. The Passenger to Aqaba. The steamship Seraphine pulled away from the port of Southampton in a gust of salty wind and the rhythmic chime of the harbour bell. Coal smoke coiled into the April sky as deckhands shouted orders and the vessel's polished hull glided out into open waters. Bound for Akaba, with stops in Gibraltar, Alexandria, and finally the Red Sea, the ship bore passengers of every sort, diplomats, missionaries, military officers, and a scattering of archaeologists and socialites chasing exotic adventure. Jane Parsons stood at the upper deck rail, her gloved hands folded neatly as the English coast receded into mist. She wore a dove-grey travel cloak over her tailored dress and kept her hat pinned securely against the sea breeze. Her luggage had been arranged in a modest cabin, and she carried little else besides her journal, a pistol hidden in the lining of her trunk, and a sharp sense of purpose. Behind her, a figure cleared her throat. "You must be Miss Parsons," said a voice, bright, composed, with the accent of someone raised just outside aristocracy. Jane turned. The speaker was Miss Clara Digby, Lady Beatrice's companion. She was tall and slender, not more than 25, with chestnut curls tucked beneath a wide straw hat. Her attire was far more fashionable than practical. Ivory gloves, silk scarf, and a rose-coloured gown that was not made for desert travel. "I hope I'm not intruding," Clara added quickly. "Lady Beatrice insisted I accompany you. She thought I might prove helpful." "That remains to be seen," Jane said lightly. "Do you have experience with fieldwork or desert terrain?" "Oh, goodness, no," Clara laughed. "But I kept Sebastian's correspondence. I transcribed some of his notes and sketched for him occasionally. I remember names, places, and Franklin Wilde." "That name again?" Jane nodded slightly. "Then I imagine we'll have much to discuss." The dining saloon of the Seraphine was all brass railings and teak panels, with liveried stewards moving briskly between tables. Jane and Clara sat opposite each other over a modest dinner of consommé, roast duck, and stewed pears. "Franklin was charming," Clara said, stirring her tea. "Too charming, really. The kind of man who never quite answered your questions, but always left you smiling. I never trusted him." Did he and Lord Wetherall get along? Not after Petra. Something changed. Clara lowered her voice. Sebastian grew suspicious. Said Franklin had begun asking about things beyond archaeology, Ottoman patrols, supply routes, coastal trade maps. He wasn't part of the dig team, you see. He just appeared one day. Jane frowned. And after Lord Wetherall's death? Franklin left camp the night before Sebastian was found, took a camel and rode east. No goodbyes, just vanished. Jane leaned back in her seat, which means he's either hiding or trying to sell something. Like the journal? Exactly. On the third day at sea, Jane was on the promenade deck, enjoying a rare moment of sun and solitude when a commotion drew her attention. A man in a brown linen suit and Panama hat stood by the railing, speaking animatedly to an officer. He was broad-shouldered, with olive-toned skin and a square jaw dusted with stubble. He gestured with a cigarette holder and laughed with theatrical ease. Jane recognized the voice. She had heard it before, at Mercer's office, in the hallway. He had been pretending to read a newspaper. Now he was here. She approached with care and listened as the officer departed. The man noticed her, tipping his hat. "Ah, Miss Parsons, isn't it? What a pleasure! The seas bring together the most intriguing travellers." "And they expose the most curious ones," she replied. "Guilty?" He offered his hand. "Langston, Edward Langston. I import textiles and brassworks from Istanbul. A merchant with an ear for private conversations in London hallways." His smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "You're good. No wonder Lady Beatrice hired you." "You're not a merchant?" "No," Langston admitted. "I'm not. Government business. Nothing official, of course. Shall we say I work for Her Majesty's interests abroad?" Jane folded her arms. "And why are you following me?" "I prefer watching over. Let's just say there are many concerned parties regarding that missing journal, and they don't all share the Crown's goodwill." "Sir Archibald sent you?" Langston's mouth twisted. "Sir Archibald sends no one. He controls, funds, persuades, but not me." "Then what do you want?" "To make sure you find the journal before anyone else does, and that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." "I don't need protection?" Langston nodded. "Number. But you might need an ally." He tipped his hat again and vanished below deck. 12 days after departure, the Seraphine finally steamed into the crescent-shaped harbour of Aqaba, its white buildings gleaming against ochre hills. Ottoman soldiers loitered near the piers, rifles slung lazily over their shoulders, while traders hawked spices, ivory beads and carpets dyed in shades of sun and blood. Jane stepped onto the gangplank, shielding her eyes. The heat was dry, immediate, and without mercy. Beside her, Clara wiped her brow and adjusted her parasol. "Do you ever wonder why these sorts of things never happen in Paris?" "All the best mysteries happen where the map turns gold," Jane replied, her gaze sweeping the clustered alleys and distant desert. A man in white robes approached, holding a placard that read, "Miss Parsons." He bowed and introduced himself in halting English. "I am Basim, camel guide, sent by Wilde. He waits near Wadi Musa." Clara blinked. "Wilde? Franklin?" Jane turned to Basim. "How long ago did he send you?" 4 days. "And he left a message?" Basim nodded and produced a crumpled note sealed with wax. Jane opened it carefully. "If you've come this far, then the game is already in motion. I did not kill him, but others will kill for what he found. Meet me at the edge of the treasury before sunset on the 3rd night. Come alone. W?" Jane stared at the script, the sharp slant of the W unmistakable. She folded the note and looked to the horizon. Petra waited. So did the truth. Chapter 4. footprints in the canyon. The journey from Aqaba to Petra took 2 days by camel, winding through arid wadis, rocky ridges, and stark plateaus that shimmered under the midday sun. Jane Parsons rode with steady grace, wrapped in a practical khaki tunic and linen scarf, her pistol discreetly holstered beneath her riding sash. Clara Digby, despite her stylish parasol and evident discomfort, kept pace admirably, though she grumbled each night about the desert's fondness for dust and beetles. Their guide, Basim, was a quiet man with deep-set eyes and an instinctive understanding of the terrain. He rarely spoke unless asked, but his gaze flickered constantly, alert for movement, tracks, signs in the wind. When questioned about Franklin Wilde, he grew cautious. "Mr. Wilde stays near old Roman path," Basim said one evening as they camped beneath a crescent moon. "Too near the tombs. He waits, but also hides." "Hides from what?" Jane asked. Basim only shrugged. "Not everyone comes to Petra for history." On the third morning at dawn, the group reached the Sikh, the narrow gorge that led into the heart of Petra. The sheer sandstone cliffs rose like colossal ribbons of fire, streaked in copper, rose, and gold. Shadows danced across the walls as light filtered through narrow slits above. Clara's breath caught. "It's like entering a cathedral built by giants." Jane said nothing. Her senses were tuned, sharpened. They reached the end of the Sikh just as the sun's first full rays struck the facade of Al-Khazne, the treasury. Its towering columns and carved pediment gleamed like molten gold. A few Bedouin lingered beneath shaded awnings, sipping strong coffee. A boy offered postcards and trinkets, but there was no sign of Franklin Wilde. Jane dismounted, moving toward the ledge where the canyon narrowed again. A small crevice ran to the left, half hidden by rockfall. Basim pointed. "That path goes toward camp, the one Wilde used." "Stay here with Clara," Jane said. "I won't be long." Clara, brushing sand from her gloves, nodded. "Do be careful. These stones seem to remember things." Jane slipped between the stones, boots silent over sand. The air was cooler here, shadowed. The silence deepened. A hawk screeched above. She followed the twisting path until it opened onto a small, secluded shelf of rock, half shaded by an overhanging cliff. There were signs of recent use: ash from a fire, a rusted tin cup, a rolled sleeping mat, and a camel tethered to a juniper tree. And yet, no sign of Wilde. Jane knelt beside the ashes, still faintly warm. Then she spotted it, a corner of a leather-bound journal poking from beneath a pile of rocks near the cliff wall. She brushed away sand and dust, lifting the journal carefully. It was cracked with heat and time, but unmistakably Sebastian Weatherall's, his initials embossed faintly on the spine. She opened to the last written page. "Found the tomb, deeper than the Roman layers, inscription partially translated to, 'He who opens the chamber must offer his life to protect the gate.' Sounds ceremonial. Still, I believe this is it. The final vault. I've hidden the drawings beneath the Falcon altar. Must confront Franklin. I fear he knows more than he claims." Jane scanned the margins. There were notations in a second hand, frantic, less tidy. "He's dead. I didn't—" There was shouting. "Sir Archibald lied. There are weapons hidden in the scroll crates. I must go. I must bury this until someone can find the truth." She was so absorbed she nearly missed the faint crunch of pebbles behind her. She turned swiftly, only to find herself facing a man, tall, sunburned, a pistol slung low at his hip. His sleeves were rolled, his boots worn from travel, and his eyes, beneath a mop of dishevelled hair, were piercing green. Franklin Wilde. "I knew you'd come," he said simply. Jane straightened. "Then you knew I'd find the journal." "I hoped you would," he said, stepping closer but keeping his hands in view. That's why I left Basine with a message." Jane raised an eyebrow. "How thoughtful. Perhaps you'd care to explain why you ran off after Lord Wetherall's death." Franklin exhaled slowly. "Because I saw him die." "Go on," Jane said. Franklin sat on a low rock, running a hand through his hair. "It wasn't an accident. Wetherall discovered something, a hidden chamber beneath one of the Nabatean temples. It wasn't just old bones and statues. It was a smuggling vault, hidden during the Roman period, perhaps used again in recent times. When he realized the tombs were being used to traffic arms and artifacts, he confronted the wrong man." "Sir Archibald?" Franklin nodded. "And a contact of his, some Ottoman officer. They were planning to move weapons through Petra's ruins, using the expedition as cover. And when Wetherall threatened to expose them?" Franklin's voice grew low. "They made it look like he collapsed in the heat. I couldn't stop it. I tried, but I was told, warned, if I said anything I'd be next." Jane narrowed her eyes. "Yet here you are, speaking." He gave a humourless smile. "Because I'm tired of running, and because I trust you more than I trust anyone else left in this game." Jane stood still for a moment, then carefully slipped the journal into her satchel. "Where are the drawings he mentioned?" Franklin stood, brushing dust from his trousers. "Follow me." They climbed higher, through a side path marked only by faint engravings on the rocks. After nearly 20 minutes of scaling and crouching through narrow crevices, they reached an alcove carved with the image of a falcon, wings spread wide over a small altar of stone. Franklin knelt and removed a loose slab. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were several folded sketches, intricate drawings of Petra's subterranean map, symbols etched into tomb walls, and what appeared to be weapon crates marked in Cyrillic script. Jane whistled softly. Not just Ottoman smuggling, Russian perhaps. "Or worse," Franklin said. "Whoever owns these routes could destabilize half the region." Jane replaced the cloth and sealed the altar. "Then we'll make sure it gets into the right hands." But even as she said it, her eyes narrowed toward the ridge above. Just for a moment, a glint of metal caught the sun. Someone was watching them. When Jane and Franklin returned to the main site, Clara and Basim were gone. A message had been carved hastily into the sand by a stick. "They took her! West! She screamed once, I follow! Be—" Jane's jaw clenched. So the hunt had begun again. But now it was no longer just about truth or treasure. It was about survival. Chapter 5. The Tomb of the Falcon King. The wind picked up as Jane Parsons stood before the carved message in the sand. Her eyes swept the ground, noting multiple camel tracks, one set clearly dragging something, or someone, and a few scattered footprints leading away from the main site toward the west-facing cliffs. "They moved fast," Franklin muttered behind her, squinting into the haze. "2, maybe 3 riders, no more than an hour ahead." Jane knelt beside the scuffed earth. Basim's prints veer away. He followed alone. Clara had been taken, but not for ransom. No note, no demand. This was a message, and Jane understood it. Someone knew she had the journal. Someone wanted her to feel the cost of keeping it. She stood and dusted her hands. "We follow, immediately." They mounted borrowed camels, weathered beasts tethered behind a vendor's tent, and rode hard toward the western gorge, the stone turning deeper crimson with each passing mile. Jane kept her eyes alert, her mind calculating routes, ambush points, and probabilities. But something gnawed at her, a detail half buried in memory. As they rode, she spoke. "Franklin, before Wetherall's death, did he ever mention the Falcon King?" Franklin hesitated. "Yes, in passing. He found fragments of a Nabatean legend, something about a rebel priest who defied Roman rule. Supposedly, this Falcon King buried himself in a hidden tomb surrounded by traps, curses, and treasures. All nonsense, of course. Jane's brow furrowed. He didn't think so. He believed the tomb held something worth dying for. And worth killing for, Franklin added grimly. The sky dimmed as they reached a narrow defile strewn with boulders and scrub. A distant echo, a scream, cut through the wind, sharp and brief. Then silence. Jane urged her camel faster. That was Clara! They dismounted near an outcrop and scrambled up the rocks. At the top was a shelf overlooking a shallow depression in the earth. A stone doorway, barely visible beneath tangled weeds and sand, lay open like a waiting mouth. Beside it, Basim's turban fluttered on a broken branch. There was blood, fresh, on the stone. Jane's jaw tightened. They took her inside. Franklin pulled a lantern from his pack and lit it. If this is the Falcon King's tomb, we may not get a second chance to get out. Jane drew her pistol. Then we make the first one count. Inside the tomb, they stepped cautiously into the darkness, the flame flickering against damp stone walls covered in faded frescoes, birds in flight, battles and hieroglyphic-style markings of falcons guarding a crypt. Franklin examined the floor. Look. Faint boot prints, and a trail of red silk, Clara's scarf, snagged on a splintered pillar. Jane picked it up, her fingers brushing a groove in the stone nearby. A trap. She took a cautious step forward and clicked a hidden pressure plate. Instantly, a stone spear shot from the wall, missing her shoulder by mere inches and shattering against the opposite wall. "Don't move unless I say," she said sharply. "This place is rigged." They moved in careful tandem through a low corridor lined with carved columns, each marked with falcons, some with missing beaks, others with blood-stained claws. Ahead, they saw light, torchlight, and voices. They crept to the edge of a chamber. Inside stood two men, armed and pacing, and between them, tied to a pillar, was Clara, pale but unharmed. "Still no sign of her friend?" one man asked, his accent Eastern European. The other, a bearded man in Ottoman uniform, shrugged. "We wait. If she has the journal, she'll come." Jane pulled Franklin back behind the pillar. "Recognize them," she whispered. "The Ottoman is Captain Tarek, corrupt, sells information to the highest bidder. The other might be from Archibald's European connections." Jane's voice was firm. "We need a distraction." Franklin nodded and crept off toward the opposite side of the chamber. A few tense moments passed. Then a sharp crash of stone, and the chamber echoed with startled shouts. As the guards turned, Jane moved fast. She darted behind a column, fired once, striking one guard's shoulder, then dove toward Clara. "I knew you'd come," Clara whispered, eyes wide. Jane cut her free and handed her a small dagger. "Stay behind me." The Ottoman raised his rifle, but Franklin emerged from the shadows and tackled him, sending both tumbling across the floor. Jane trained her pistol on the wounded man. "Call your men off, now!" He snarled. "You don't know what you've walked into." "I know enough," Jane said. "Enough to bury you in this tomb if you don't cooperate." Franklin stood, breathing hard, holding the Ottoman's pistol. "He's down! Let's go!" But as they turned, Clara gasped. "Look, there!" At the far end of the chamber stood a massive carved stone door, half open. Beyond it glowed a soft amber light. "The inner sanctum," Jane murmured. Against every instinct screaming for escape, she stepped forward. Inside, they found a vaulted crypt of sandstone and gold. The walls were covered in ancient murals, depicting the Falcon King sitting atop a throne of bones, a great battle with Roman soldiers, and finally, a scroll sealed with a crimson ribbon. In the centre of the chamber stood a pedestal, upon which lay an ornate chest, half open. Jane reached out, lifting the lid. Inside were ancient relics, scrolls wrapped in cloth, small gold idols, and beneath them, a crate marked with Russian Cyrillic letters, fresh, modern. Weapons? Clara gasped. My God! This was never just about history, Jane said softly. Weatherall uncovered an ancient tomb being repurposed by modern smugglers, a perfect cover, hidden from the world, no customs officers, no oversight. Franklin swore under his breath. He tried to stop it. They silenced him. And Mercer. Jane turned to him. We have enough to expose them now. The journal, the drawings, the crate. A shout echoed from behind. More men, reinforcements. Jane slammed the chest shut. We move now! They raced back through the tomb, dodging traps and dragging Clara along the safest paths. Franklin fired a warning shot as a figure appeared in the entryway. The man turned and fled. Basim's body lay just beyond the threshold, stabbed but still breathing. Jane dropped to his side. I found her, he whispered weakly. I hid the camel key under altar rock. For you. Jane pressed his hand. You've done more than enough. They carried him out as the sun dipped low behind the cliffs, casting Petra in gold and crimson. That night they lit a campfire under the stars, and Jane stitched a wound on Basim's side. Clara sat beside him, offering water and murmuring comfort. Franklin returned with the journal, now sealed and packed away with the stolen scrolls. I saw someone watching from the ridge as we escaped, he said. Tall, heavy-set, limped. Sir Archibald, Jane said quietly. He followed us to Petra. Number. He led us here, Jane said, and now he knows we have the evidence. She stared into the fire, the weight of the truth settling. Chapter 6. The Masquerade of Motives. The fire burned low as midnight blanketed the cliffs of Petra in a velvet hush. Jane Parsons stood at the edge of the camp, arms folded, eyes fixed on the dark horizon where Sir Archerald Mercer had last been seen. She had long suspected his involvement. Now, with the evidence secured, she was sure. Behind her, the camp stirred with quiet tension. Clara, wrapped in a wool blanket, lay curled beside Basim, who had fallen into an exhausted, pain-laced sleep. His breathing was shallow but steady. Franklin sat polishing a battered revolver, his brow furrowed. You don't sleep much, he muttered, glancing at Jane. I sleep when things are settled. He gave a dry chuckle, which, given your profession, must be rare. Jane didn't smile. Mercer knows we have the journal. He'll want to intercept us before we reach the British consulate in Jerusalem. Franklin looked up. So what's the plan? We don't go to Jerusalem, she replied. We go back to Aqaba, quietly, send the evidence to the Foreign Office by sea, and then, she turned to face him, we set a trap. 2 days later, they arrived under cover of darkness at the port city of Akaba. Jane had paid a trusted courier to ferry the journal and the Russian-marked weapons inventory aboard a cargo steamer bound for Alexandria, and from there to London. She made sure the documents bore no return address, only a letter to Colonel James Haddington of the War Office, a man who, she knew, owed her a favour. But the moment they entered the bazaar quarter, Jane felt something was amiss. Too quiet. Shadows moved where no sellers lingered. A whiff of cigar smoke drifted past an alley arch. He's here, she whispered to Franklin. Mercer? Or one of his men? They ducked into a low cafe on the outskirts of the market. The scent of cardamom and roasted lamb clung to the thick air, mingling with the hum of an oud player in the corner. Clara frowned. How could Sir Archibald track us so quickly? Jane met her gaze. Because someone's been telling him everything. A long pause followed. Clara's face paled. You mean? Jane nodded slowly. Basim was trusted. Franklin and I were careful. But someone knew we'd go to the tomb. Someone knew we'd find the journal. Someone who had access to Lady Beatrice's correspondence. Franklin stiffened. You think Clara—" "No," Jane said, "not Clara." She turned to Clara and held out a small leather-bound notebook, the same one Clara had used to sketch the expedition's notes for Wetherall. "Your notebook had missing pages, torn from the back. Why?" Clara blinked. I don't know. I keep everything tidy. Perhaps one fell." "Not one. 10, and they were torn out cleanly." Jane turned to the back of the room. A man had entered quietly, dressed in the robes of a trader, his face half covered by a keffiyeh. Edward Langston. Jane stood. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Langston smirked. "You sent the journal to London. Clever. Mercer is displeased." Clara stood. "Wait, you work for Mercer?" Langston's voice was casual. "Not directly. I'm what you might call a subcontractor. But let's just say I've grown fond of this game, and profitable." Jane crossed her arms. "Did you kill Wetherall?" Langston tilted his head. "Oh no, I only came to clean up after." "You won't get another chance," Jane said coolly. Langston's hand twitched toward his belt, but he didn't draw. Not yet. "I don't need to," he said. "Mercer has other people, smarter, closer." His eyes flicked to Clara. Jane followed his gaze, then froze. Clara's face had changed. The softness had drained. Her eyes were hard, cold. And then she spoke, clear, direct. "He's right." Franklin stood. "Clara?" "I'm not who you think," she said quietly. "My name is Elise Durand, French. I was assigned to Lord Wetherall 6 months before the expedition. My orders were to retrieve the journal and determine whether the site held any strategic value." Jane's voice was even. "Assigned by whom?" "French intelligence." Langston chuckled. "Ah, how delightful. We're all wearing masks." Jane's voice was calm, but her mind spun. Clara, Elise, had travelled with them, feigned fear, shared meals. But she had also warned Jane of Franklin, helped Basim, risked herself at the tomb. "You protected the journal," Jane said at last. "I protected what I believed was the greater good," Elise replied. "Mercer wants to destabilise the region. He's not just smuggling weapons, he's building a private empire." Langston's eyes narrowed. "Enough talk." But Franklin was faster. A single gunshot rang out, the bullet striking Langston's hand, knocking his weapon away. Chaos erupted. Jane tackled Clara behind a pillar as Langston stumbled back, clutching his bleeding hand and swearing. The cafe owner shouted in Arabic as chairs clattered and patrons fled. Franklin kicked Langston's pistol away and levelled his gun. "Tell Mercer," Jane said, her voice steel. "We're not afraid of shadows." Langston spat blood onto the tiles. "This isn't over, Parsons." "Good," she replied. "Neither is my investigation." That night, back at the camp. In a quiet tent pitched on the outskirts of the city, Jane poured tea from a dented kettle. Elise, sat cross-legged opposite her, freshly bandaged and silent. "You could have betrayed me," Jane said. "I nearly did," Elise replied. "But I couldn't. I saw what Mercer was planning. You're the only one who can stop him." Jane looked at her, tired but resolute. "Then we finish this. Together." Franklin entered, a telegram in hand. "It's from London," he said. "Colonel Haddington received the journal. The War Office is moving against Mercer's holdings in Suez and Cairo. Quietly." Jane smiled faintly. "Then it worked." Franklin nodded. "But he's still out there." Jane sipped her tea. "And we still have one last message to deliver." Far across the sea, in a marble-clad office in Whitehall, Sir Archerald Mercer poured himself a scotch as a young aide entered the room. "Telegram from Akaba, sir." Mercer took it, read it. Then slowly, ever so slowly, his hand began to tremble. The game was no longer in the shadows. Jane Parsons had brought it into the light, and he would have to answer for it. Chapter 7. The Secrets Beneath the Sandstone. The wind off the Red Sea blew hot and sharp through the port of Aqaba, flapping canvas sails and ruffling the British flag hoisted above the consulate gate. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation in the Petra tomb. In that time, Jane's dispatches to London had reached the highest levels of government, bringing swift and discreet action. The War Office, with support from the Foreign Office, had begun dismantling Sir Archerald Mercer's operations, impounding cargo ships, freezing funds, and arresting several key associates across Suez and Cairo. But Sir Archibald himself remained untouched, too powerful, too insulated, until today. Jane arrived back in London beneath a curtain of autumn fog. Her return had been kept quiet, no reporters, no fanfare. She stepped off the train at Paddington Station alone, save for a single leather suitcase and her pistol tucked beneath a silk scarf. At 10:45 a.m, she entered the marble foyer of the Athenaeum Club under a false name. By 11 o'clock, she was seated in a private drawing-room facing Sir Archerald Mercer for the first time since her departure for Petra. He looked older, paler, yet no less dangerous. His cane rested beside him like a ceremonial sceptre, his suit, charcoal grey, pressed to perfection. "I must admit, Miss Parsons," he said with a faint sneer, "you've caused quite the stir." "I do enjoy stirring things," she replied calmly. "You've embarrassed half the Foreign Office, interfered with critical operations abroad. And for what? An old tomb and some scribbles from a dead man?" "Not scribbles," Jane said coolly. "Evidence of arms trafficking, of murder, and of your betrayal of crown and country." Mercer chuckled. "The crown is a matter of perspective. I built empires while Parliament debated tea imports." "You buried men to do it." "You're a clever woman," he said, his tone darkening. "But clever women are rarely remembered. Do you really think anyone will care what happened in a forgotten tomb in the desert?" Jane reached into her bag and placed a sealed dossier on the table. "I don't need them to remember the tomb," she said. "Just the bank accounts, the arms shipments, the Ottoman letters with your signature, the photographs of your man Langston arranging crates in Petra. They're all in here." Mercer didn't reach for the folder. Instead, he leaned forward. "You'll be stopped. This will be buried. Men like me don't fall, Miss Parsons." "Not until they've already slipped," she replied. At that moment, the door opened, and Colonel James Haddington stepped inside. "Sir Archibald Mercer," Haddington said formally, "by order of the War Office, you are under investigation for treason, arms smuggling, and conspiracy against the Crown." Mercer blinked. For the first time, fear cracked through his polished mask. "This is outrageous!" "Save it for the inquiry," Haddington cut in, gesturing to the 2 officers flanking him. As they escorted Mercer from the room, Jane watched silently. There was no satisfaction, only justice. Later that evening, as Jane walked the edge of the Grosvenor Square, she paused beneath a gas lamp, her umbrella casting an elegant silhouette against the cobbled path. Footsteps approached. Franklin Wilde, hat low, joined her without a word. "Well?" he asked. Jane nodded. "He's finished." "And Clara?" "She's back in France, quietly. Her report will likely vanish into a drawer in Paris, but she left a letter. She said you were braver than you pretended." Franklin gave a crooked smile. "I do put on a good show." He paused, then added more seriously, "What about you? What's next for Jane Parsons?" Jane looked out at the rain-slicked street, the flickering lamplight reflected in puddles. "There's always another secret," she said softly, "another lie dressed as duty. But for now, tea and sleep." Franklin laughed. "Reasonable priorities." He offered his arm. She took it, and they walked away from the square together. Epilogue. A letter unfolded. A week later, in her small study, Jane sat at her desk, reviewing a parcel that had arrived with no return address. Inside was a folded sketch, a map of the Petra tomb, with one section circled in red. Beneath it, a note. The chamber we never reached lies deeper still. Perhaps the Falcon King hid more than treasure. If you're ever ready for one more secret, I'll meet you there. Indeed, Jane leaned back in her chair, lips curling into the faintest smile. The desert was calling again, and somewhere beneath the sandstone, another truth waited.